Here's a number that should scare you. Companies have leaked millions of private records. Verizon, Accenture, photo rolls, medical files, all from the same mistake, a single public S3 bucket. S3 is Amazon's storage service, and it's brilliant, but most tutorials accidentally teach you to make that exact mistake. This deep dive does S3 the safe, professional way. By the end, you'll know precisely which checkbox causes the leaks and why you leave it on. So what is S3, the simple storage service? The problem, a hard drive or an EC2 disk has a fixed size, lives in one place, and can die. S3 is object storage, practically unlimited and famously durable, with 11 nines of durability. That means if you stored 10 million files, you'd expect to lose one about once every 10,000 years. Real example, every user upload, photo, and backup for an app lives here. This is the buckets list, and a bucket is simply a top-level container. Let's create one. The problem it solves, your data needs a globally unique home. In the Create Bucket wizard, you pick a name, and it has to be unique across all of AWS on Earth, so the generic names are long gone, and a region, the city it lives in. And see this section, Block Public Access? It's ON by default, and we leave it on. Remember that, it's the single most important setting on this screen, and we'll come back to exactly why. Now we put a file in, an object. The problem, getting data into the cloud reliably. You upload, and each object has a key, its full name, and an object URL. Real example, we upload index.html. Notice that if you click that object URL right now, you get access denied, which is S3 protecting you by default. That denied message is a feature, not a bug, and we'll see exactly why in a moment. Here's something nearly every beginner gets wrong. S3 has no folders. The problem, you think you're making directories. But S3 is a flat key space. Every object is just one long name. When you make a folder called Photos and upload cat.jpg, the real key is photos/cat.jpg. That slash is just part of the name. The console draws it like a folder to be friendly, and it even creates a tiny 0-byte placeholder, but under the hood there are no folders, only key prefixes. So who can actually read your data? The problem, people mix up 3 different permission systems and accidentally expose everything. There are exactly 3. IAM policies attached to a user or role, what can this person do? Bucket policies attached to the bucket itself, who can touch this bucket, and they're how you do cross-account or public access. And ACLs are the old per object way, which AWS now recommends turning off entirely. The clean approach, IAM plus bucket policies, with ACLs disabled. Now the famous checkbox, block public access. The problem, this is the setting behind nearly every S3 data leak. When it's on, S3 refuses to make anything public, even if a sloppy bucket policy tries to. The mistake in most tutorials, they tell you to switch it off to make things work. The professional rule, keep all 4 of these toggles ON unless you are deliberately and knowingly building something meant for the whole internet. On by default, and on almost always. But what if you genuinely need to send one file to one person? The problem, people make the entire bucket public just to share a single file and leak everything else. The right tool is a pre-signed URL. It's a temporary, signed link to one private object that expires after minutes or hours and then stops working, while your bucket stays completely private, with block public access still on. You generate it with one click or one command. Share access, not exposure. S3 can also host an entire static website cheaply. On the Properties tab, there's static website hosting. The problem it solves, you want a simple site without running a server. You enable hosting and point it at your index file. The key professional nuance. This is the one case where the content is meant to be public, so you make that choice deliberately, with a narrow policy for just that content, instead of carelessly switching off block public access on everything. What happens when you overwrite or delete the wrong file? Without protection, it's just gone. The fix is versioning, here on the Properties tab. With it on, every change keeps the previous copy. Real example, we uploaded our catalog, then overwrote it, and both versions are sitting right here, so we can restore the original in one click. Even a delete just adds a delete marker you can undo. Turn on versioning for anything you would hate to lose. Not all data is equal, and paying full price for files nobody touches is wasted money. That's what storage classes are for. Standard is for data you access often. Intelligent. Tiering automatically moves objects between tiers when your access pattern is unknown, set it and forget it. Standard infrequent access is for backups you rarely read. And Glacier, in its instant, flexible, and deep archive flavors, is dirt cheap for long-term archives you almost never touch. Match the class to how often you actually read the data. Even better, you can automate that with Lifecycle rules. The problem, data piles up and the cost grows forever. On the Management tab, you create a rule that moves objects automatically, for example, Standard for 30 days, then Infrequent Access, then Glacier after 90 days, and finally Delete after a year. Real impact, cold data slides into cheaper and cheaper storage with zero effort, and that is the single biggest lever for cutting your S3 bill. A quick word on encryption. The problem, data at rest needs protecting, and compliance often requires it. The good news, shown here in Properties, S3 now encrypts every object by default, with S3 managed keys at no extra cost. If you need to control the keys yourself, for audit or compliance, you switch to SSE with KMS. Either way, your data on disk is encrypted, and you rarely have to think about it. Let's be honest about cost, because surprise S3 bills are common. You pay for three things: storage per gigabyte, requests like gets and puts, and, the trap, data transfer out to the internet. That egress is usually the expensive part, not the storage itself. Free tier gives you 5 gigabytes for a year. And the biggest money saver, again, is Lifecycle rules moving cold data to cheaper classes automatically. Let's lock it in. What you can now do that most tutorials never teach. Keep block public access on. That's the leak checkbox. Remember, folders are fake, just key prefixes. Pick a storage class by how often you read the data, and use Lifecycle rules to cut the bill automatically. Share private files with pre-signed URLs, never by making a bucket public. And turn on versioning, so a bad overwrite is always recoverable. That's S3 the way professionals actually use it: cheap, secure, and shareable. Each service gets its own deep dive, so subscribe to V on Cloud and we'll keep making AWS simple, with real examples.